It's Sunday, January 19, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is a professor in the Department of Communication and Journalism at Texas A&M University. She's author of Demagogue for President, the rhetorical genius of Donald Trump, author of Rhetorical Tricks column at Resolute Square, and launching soon is The Tricky Show, another string to her bow. Dr. Jennifer Mercieca, welcome to the Weekend Show.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled you've got so much going on. You bring so much expertise to these conversations, and I know that people love listening to you. Let's talk, because we are so close to the inauguration of Donald Trump. Let's talk about how America might change in the coming weeks, months, and years, because even ahead of his inauguration, and since he won the election, we have seen an emboldened individual, somebody who has almost taken this mandate that he claims he has to a whole new level.
Yeah, it's difficult to predict how far he'll go, right? And that's the problem with someone who is an authoritarian like Donald Trump is. He has, of course, made promises. He has made threats. And it's very difficult to know how far he'll take those promises and threats. Of course, the entire time he was running, he said he was going to be a dictator. On day one, he said it was only going to be for day one. I don't think a lot of us believed that that was possible. Of course, in the history of dictators, no one seizes dictatorial power, and just gives it up after a day. So it seems unlikely that someone like Donald Trump would do that. But here we are on the precipice of, a potential new American dictatorship.
It's so frightening to those people. I mean, I'm not from here, and, I came here to Barack Obama's America, which just seems so completely different to what we're dealing with now. But we're looking at the world order shifting, courtesy not just of Trump, because, as you know, he's a bit of an empty vessel who is he's a great mark for the Kremlin or for Steve Bannon or for Peter Thiel or the Heritage Foundation, whoever is pulling his strings. But it is going to mean that the world looks different during and after this administration.
I think that's right. When Andrew Jackson was inaugurated in 1828, Daniel Webster, who was a conservative Whig kind of guy at the time, he said that he brings a breeze with him into the Oval Office, and which way the wind blows, he couldn't be sure, right? He said that his fear was stronger than his hope. And that's sort of my approach to thinking about this. I think that we know a little bit about what Donald Trump will bring with him, what kind of breeze it will be. But it's really difficult to predict exactly what will happen. And certainly one of the possibilities, and this was something that, I was seeing sort of forecasted a year, 2 years ago even, is this kind of new world alliance of authoritarian regimes with the United States as a new member of this sort of authoritarian alliance. And that they would divide up the world and sort of control between them all of the nuclear weapons, all of the oil, and that would be a very disruptive and I think very dark place for the world to find itself. And so that's why a lot of folks like me were, trying to warn America about what the possibilities were. But the thing is that, just like Daniel Webster in 1828, it's really difficult to know which way the wind will blow. And with Donald Trump, he's so frequently blowing wind, right? That most people don't believe him. It's all bluster, they think. And so, even if, as I did, have this sort of sense that perhaps this was what was going to happen, Someone like my dad who voted for Donald Trump would be like, no way, that's not ever going to happen. It's not possible. Even if, he sort of supports some of the policies that he promised, he still doesn't think that it's likely that Trump will do them. And not necessarily because he doesn't think that Trump has the will to do it, but he thinks that, the system will prevent him from doing it. And so we're at a difficult place to predict what will happen. And I think that that's why we're all feeling so anxious right now.
And that system that your dad relies on to keep us safe and keep him safe, that we've all been talking about for years, guardrails, I think is the phrase, or who only knows what those things used to be. But they're not there this time by nature of the fact that he weaponizes these institutions, the judiciary, with the appointments of people who are simply just Trump surrogates. And we've seen that with the Supreme Court, of course, giving him this blanket immunity. That is what's different this time around, I guess. In addition to the fact that he doesn't have the Mark Millies and the kind of individuals with experience in the Oval Office to say, actually, that's not a good idea. I mean, he's now talking about seizing the Panama Canal by military force. I mean, this is unprecedented.
It is. And it's an unprecedented use of power or accumulation of power, I should say, meaning that there is not, as you mentioned, there is not another institution or, other people, even in his party or in the opposition party, that can prevent him from doing whatever it is he decides he wants to do. And I think that that is incredibly unusual in American history. It's obviously against, the whole design of the Constitution, which was designed to separate and balance powers. We have seen, more and more authority being placed in the executive branch, really since the 1900s, 1902, around then. But with the I think it's Donald Trump versus the United States is the ruling where the Supreme Court said that as long as the president is doing it under the guise of official duties, he cannot be held legally liable or responsible. That's it's unfathomable to me that you would give someone like Donald Trump that power. When I wrote a book about his 2016 election, I wrote about the rhetorical strategies that he uses to prevent himself from being held accountable for his words and actions. And here the Supreme Court has given him unaccountable power. It's frightening.
Those rhetorical skills that he applies. I just watched the Netflix show Dirty John, which is about a narcissist who kind of chases down women and marries them and steals all their money and manipulates them. And I was watching it and I was thinking, my goodness, and that's based on a true story, which is based on a podcast, as a lot of these things are. And I was thinking, wow, I mean, this guy didn't look anything like Trump. He was very handsome, very charismatic. But the tactics are exactly how Trump operates. The behavior of the narcissist, it's not just in abusive relationships with romantic partners. It can actually be in a relationship with the judiciary or in a relationship with the FBI or the media and the press and also the voters.
Absolutely. And Donald Trump is very good at using these strategies to coerce and to force. The subtitle of my book is The Rhetorical Genius of Donald Trump. And folks have never liked that. When I talk about it, they always say, is he really a genius? This guy is so dumb. But he is a genius at manipulating others, and we don't like to think of that as a kind of genius, but it's diabolical. But he is incredibly savvy. He is unrelenting. He will not back down when, other people would quit or stop or feel ashamed of their behavior. He has none of those compunctions, that none of that holds him back. And he knows how to figure out the vulnerabilities of any institution, any person, any situation, and then exploit those vulnerabilities. So he has exploited the vulnerabilities in our media system. He has exploited the vulnerabilities in our democracy, in our constitution, in our judicial system, and on and on and on, right? Again, this is the last person that you would want to hand unaccountable power, and yet we have done that.
And he does it in a way that makes you think you're going mad. This is
Yes.
what's so clever about it, is that you think,
Yes.
well, is it me? Because and the
Yes.
manipulation. There was a scene in this drama where the guy sets fire to his wife's car. It's a beautiful car, and they're getting a divorce. He sets fire, so the police catch him, and they say to him, you know, we're going to obviously criminalize you for this. And he's like, but it's my car. I'm not divorced yet. And I thought, this is so interesting. He was like, I have a spare fob for the car. I'm like, she lets me drive it. So what's the crime? And that in itself is very much how Trump operates. It's like, I have the keys. So this isn't a crime.
Yes. There's two things you said there that really resonate with me. One is that he makes you feel crazy. And the whole time that I was writing the book with him, about him, I kept thinking, you know, is this really real? Is he really a demagogue? Is he really using these language strategies like this? Is he really an authoritarian? And by the time I got to the end of the book, I realized that anyone who uses authoritarian language strategies is in fact an authoritarian, because those are a form of coercion. They're a form of force. And so once I realized that, I became very calm. I thought that I do see clearly. And then there have been lots of other sort of validating reports. So the first one was the Mueller report. And the way that Robert Mueller explained Donald Trump's interactions with his staff, and the way that he tried to coerce and silence them, the way that he threatened people. And I thought, you know, those are all the things that I'm writing about. I see that. He sees that. That's external validation. Then the January 6th committee report was another, you know, sort of moment of here, you know, it's not just me. It's not just the media that I pay attention to. You know, this is another sort of expert external validation that what we think is real is actually real. I find those things very comforting, because otherwise, you know, it's hard to know if you're sort of in your own silo and what you think is real isn't. And Donald Trump is so good at manipulating reality that he does make you question almost daily. And then if you talk to Trump supporters, they're so convinced and they're so committed to it that they think you're crazy. And so it really has been an interesting sort of and difficult experience of trying to understand him and track him. The second thing that I think is really important that you said is the way that Trump always gives himself the out of plausible deniability.
Right.
Like the character in that story with the car fob, you know, Trump always has something in his pocket, literally, that he can pull out and say, but what about this? Look, this is exculpatory. This, you know, is the thing that is going to get me out of jail. And he convinces us each time and every time that that is the one and only important thing. You know, so we just had the January 6th anniversary. And one of the things that I wrote about in my statement to the January 6th committee was the way that Donald Trump used war rhetoric specifically on January 6th at his speech at the Ellipse. And I'm sure you remember, you've heard him say it a million times, that it was a perfect speech. It was a day of love, he said, right? And he wants us to focus on the fact that he said peacefully and patriotically. I want you to march peacefully and patriotically down to the Capitol. He did say those words. Those are the words that were written by a speechwriter. He also said fight 20 times over the course of the speech.
Yeah.
That was not written by the speechwriter. That was Donald Trump elaborating. That was him going off script. That was him saying what he really wanted. But he tells us every time he talks about that speech to focus only on the peacefully and patriotically part.
So
right.
clever.
And so It is. And it's his get out of jail, literally get out of jail free card. It's the plausible deniability that he always seems to have in his pocket that helps him. I mean, again, this is a diabolical genius, this guy. He's always got that. He's always got some way out, or he invents it.
It's frustrating that we are still trying to analyze him and giving him so much airtime, isn't it? Because
yes,
he's so hateful and such a vile person and a terrible, terrible person, arguably one of the worst Americans to ever have lived. And yet, we I suppose part of this insanity that he's thrust upon us, where we don't know if something is real or not, we're just trying to make sense of it in our conversations and in our analysis. And it's not just on this show, but it's at every single dining table around the United States. It's in fact around the world. I have viewers and people who write to me from the other side of the world who literally are watching this as if it is the Netflix drama.
It is a drama. Yes. And so that's what human beings do. We practice what's called sense-making behavior, where we try to understand some confusing part of reality, or we try to even just reassure ourselves that we have a good sense of what reality is. It's how human beings make sense of the world. Think about how you follow the crowd when you get off a plane because you're not sure how to get out of an airport you've never been in before, right? It's like sort of looking for others to make sense of what the direction is and where you should go. So these conversations are perfectly normal, and they're absolutely useful. And it's actually when we stop having these conversations that it's bad.
Right. That's when you want to worry. And I think we should probably point out that we're not having these conversations and talking about him in this way because we are kind of lefty Democrats. This would apply to anybody. This is about humanity. It's also about the safety and security of the nation. We criticize or we critique because we love America. We want the best for it. And I very much want the Republicans to have a legitimate leader because I believe in the democracy and I believe in the system of government. But he is the anomaly.
That's right. The standard that I always use to judge political behavior and political speech is whether or not it is good for democracy. I think that democracy is the standard that we ought to use. And so, whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's Joe Biden or anyone else, if their rhetoric is coercion, if it's deceitful, if it's authoritarian, then I'm going to critique it for those reasons. If it's not, then we'll celebrate it as good rhetoric. So
people kind of forget that a functioning democracy requires an opposition, political opposition, to hold the government to account. And obviously the system here in the US is not quite as we have in the UK, where we literally have a shadow government, where each government position or cabinet position has an equivalent on the opposite side of the house. And that is a system that works for the UK. Do you think that could work here? Do you think that would actually kind of raise the standard of holding the government, whoever it is, to account?
Perhaps. I've seen Timothy Snyder recently write about that. And I thought that was an intriguing idea. I'm not sure. We don't have that experience here, so I don't know how it would work. And it would really depend on how much information they had and how much attention they were able to draw, for their sort of critiques of whatever the person.
But they would get security briefings. I mean, this is what's so interesting.
Oh, so it's that official
as a system, yeah. Because again, it's how the democracy is balanced. But that kind of brings me to the point that we don't really have debate here anymore. I think we maybe did years ago before I showed up, but it's really just like statements, isn't it? It's like you make your statement, then everyone will leave, and then a few people will come back in and you'll make your statement.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're a nation awash in propaganda. Social media has enabled each and every one of us to have more propaganda power than any nation had, during World War I or World War II. It's actually insane if you think about the fact that we have unleashed all of these propagandists into our public sphere without any kind of rules or restrictions. And in fact, that the social media companies are wanting to reduce the restrictions, right? They're sort of using the eulogistic term of free speech and saying that they want to get rid of all restrictions, all moderation, all fact checking, all things like that, or at least Twitter and Facebook. I'm on Blue Sky, and Blue Sky is has not gone that way. We'll see what happens with that.
Yes. Now this was an announcement on the 7th of January that Mark Zuckerberg, Meta's founder, he decided to end fact-checking on his platforms. People said he was bending a knee to Donald Trump. I know he donated $1 million to the Inauguration Fund. But he says, let's be clear, the fact-checkers have not been politically biased. They've been perceived as such because of politically motivated efforts to smear them. I am very much of the opinion, because I come from a country where hate speech is banned, that without moderation, you end up with just it's like a mosh pit of negativity. And that's why Blue Sky, where I've ended up with the rest of the snowflakes, seems to be a much more kind of gentle affair. It's like we're sipping martinis and just being sweet to each other.
It is more pleasant on Blue Sky than it has been on Twitter for me, for sure.
Yeah.
A robust public sphere is incredibly important to democracy. The ability to communicate freely, the ability to have free speech, to speak in public without fear of retribution or repercussions is essential to the democratic way of life, right? I teach social movements. And one of the things that I really stress with my students is that the fact that these people can go out into the street and carry a sign and say, I think this or that, and you should do this or that. That means that they feel safe enough to do that, right? That this is a government that protects your ability to protest, to speak freely. And so it's essential that we have that, right? Social media platforms are not public spaces. They are not used by officials to make decisions about policies that are affecting the public, right? There's no way for us to directly communicate to politicians where they are listening to us and we know that they are, and to have, the sort of give and take. There's the illusion of that, right? There's the promise of that. We were told we were going to get that out of, the sort of techno, optimism of the 90s and the early 2000s. But that's not what it became. It became, this algorithmically controlled outrage machine. And
a business as well. I mean, it's a profitable business, right?
Big business, right? Yeah. And so we think we're doing democracy when we go onto these platforms and we express our opinions, but it would be much better for us to go out into the street and do that. That would be the kind of protected speech that, the Constitution, First Amendment protects. It would be the kinds that people pay attention to, and that is meaningful, right? Gathering with others to express ourselves. What we do on social media, it isn't the same thing.
And Elon Musk, who, when he bought Twitter, claimed that he was going to make it the bastion of free speech and that he was a free speech absolutist, and is now banning people's accounts, shutting them down and silencing them because he doesn't like what they have to say. And of course, we guessed he might be in the tank for Donald Trump. Then, of course, he went all out, then spent $250 million plus on helping to get Donald Trump elected. I mean, his story, especially his kind of immigration story as well, bouncing from South Africa to Canada to America, and it's been questioned as to whether or not he was here legally. His brother certainly alluded to it. This is an example of the hypocrisy when business and this free speech conversation converge.
Absolutely. And even if he isn't banning accounts, he is certainly deprioritizing them with the
Right.
algorithms. So there's been lots of research that has come out since the election about the reach of liberal left Democratic accounts on Twitter versus, the right wing accounts, or the ones that pay him. Certainly he's promised them, in fact, that they will get more reach. And so, yeah, I mean, it's such a great example of how, Twitter was so important for Musk and for the right in general, because it was the place where people went to set the nation's agenda. What should we be talking about? How should we be framing these news stories? It was very much the place where people who are highly engaged with the news would go to get news and information and to disseminate news and information. And so it was the central node of our information space. And so, yeah, the ability to control that space was highly prized. And what we've seen is what we, of course, feared, which is that when Musk controlled it, he would use it and spin it towards his political priorities, which is exactly what he's done. And, if there's a recipe for gaining power in this country, what we've seen from Donald Trump and what we've seen from Musk is that the path to power is primarily through social media, right? It's primarily through controlling the media. And so whether, these robber barons are buying up media companies, or whether they have already owned them for a while and now they're making use of them in different ways, what we see is that the media is not free, unfortunately.
And that leads us to the elephant in the room, which is all those people decrying that Trump did not legitimately win the election by nature of the amount of disinformation and propaganda supported by the social media networks, the corporate media, that effectively gave him a head start. Because, I mean, I'm not going to go into the conspiracies, but it would be foolish for us to ignore that some people have those views, that voter rolls were purged. I mean, there's some truth to that too. But this election was fishy, to say the very least, by nature of the amount of money that was spent to buy votes on a one-by-one basis at $1 million a pop in the case of Elon Musk. I mean, it was done in plain sight, didn't even try and hide it. He even went to court and was awarded the opportunity to run this lottery whereby if you voted Republican, you were potentially up for $1 million.
Yeah. So there's a case to be made that Donald Trump did not legitimately win the election in 2016 based on the same argument or a similar argument. So Kathleen Hall Jamieson, very prominent communication scholar, she wrote a book after the 2016 election, maybe it came out in 2018, where she argued pretty convincingly that the Russian trolls and the help that Trump got from Russian media were enough to tip the election in his favor. It was a very close election, obviously. There were all of those fake news websites that were put up in Eastern European countries that promoted Trump and his agenda in 2016. The InfoWars, Roger Stone, Stop the Steal campaign, all of that originated in 2016. Right. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that Donald Trump not only used sort of legacy traditional media to his advantage, not only used, what we could see on social media, but also had these sort of underlying aids, right? These currents of help that helped to put him into power. I think that the same case could be made for 2024. I think that in some ways it's the same networks, sort of trying to keep him afloat and to put him into power.
But ownership has changed, though, hasn't it? A lot of the ownership of these corporate entities has changed in favor of far right and certainly MAGA Republican ownership, which is the shift, really, because he complained that the media was for the left and owned by the left. But actually, 2024 is a very different landscape.
It is. It absolutely was. And one of the realizations that I had, I think pretty late, unfortunately, in the 2024 election was that no two people were seeing the same election, right? Because our media feeds are so isolated from one another. The way that and the algorithms that I engage with, the information that I had just was so different from other people. And so I would do interviews and I would chat with people and I would, sort of proclaim like, this is the reality of what's happening. And it would be very different for them. It would be very new. And when I talked to my students, it would be different again. And I really realized that this was the first really unreality election, right? And that's a Russian propaganda strategy where you make it so that there's no reality. So that happened. And I think that that's important and noteworthy. Musk buying Twitter was really important. I think, when historians are able to unravel what happened in this election and the researchers and the analysts can figure out, exactly who was funding who and how it was all sort of negotiated and worked out, I think there'll be a fascinating story to tell. I don't think we have the answers at this point.
But it's these multiple realities that is the thing that really interests me about the election, because obviously he's going to say he won whatever happened, and he did that in 2020. He said that he won, and he pretended to be the president for 4 years, just using Mar-a-Lago as the Oval Office.
Yes.
And for the people that supported him, they believed that he had won. They lived in a algorithm and in a physical world even, where the people that they were hanging out with all thought that he was the president and Joe Biden was the illegitimate president. And he's still saying it now. Trump, only this last 2 weeks, has got up and reminded us that Biden didn't legitimately win in 2020. That is the authoritarian that I hope people are starting to see, if they couldn't quite make sense of the difference between a traditional political candidate and an authoritarian wannabe dictator. That's the difference.
It is indeed the difference. Yeah. So the Democratic Party has in a way, it's frustrating to watch it happen, but they have very decorously adhered to the norms of the peaceful transfer of power, right? So we saw Trump with Biden in the Oval Office, sitting by the fireplace, chatting it up, right? And so a lot of people didn't like to see that.
It was excruciating for a lot of people, yeah.
But they're trying to show, right, that this is the way you behave in a democracy where the rule of law is the most important thing. And so you saw Kamala Harris as vice president, preside over the counting of the ballots on January 6th. And it was expeditious. It took 40 minutes, less than an hour.
Yeah.
Right. And so they want to show that they are upholding the norms. And I think that is important. Because then, as you said, you can see the difference between what is normal and what isn't. But of course, it does. Every time they uphold the norms, it seems as though Donald Trump is one step closer to becoming president, and it's hard to watch.
It's so interesting, the kind of dueling realities, because for all of Kamala Harris's dignity and grace in certifying the election for Trump and having to say her own name that she lost, referring to herself in the third person, the Republicans sitting in the chamber, they just didn't care whether she was sticking to the protocol or not. They just didn't care. They wouldn't do it. And the fact that she was setting an example was still irrelevant to them. It was all about winning.
Yeah. And I'm not the first one to say this, and even I've been saying this for a while, but it's asymmetrical, right? You can't have one side doing info warrior politics and the other side doing normie politics.
Right.
Right. The info warriors don't adhere to the rules, to the norms. And so they're always going to be able to cheat to win. And the other side is is all about defending the norms and the institutions. And so therefore they are beholden to the rules. And so they do not cheat to win, even though, of course, they are accused of cheating to win. And so it's incredibly frustrating to watch. But at the same time, if your goal is to defend norms and institutions and the Constitution,
that you have to do it.
You have to do that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Okay.
It's the public's fault.
Let's take a quick break. I mean, this is very interesting, and I'm kind of keen to explore it more. So we'll do more of this in just a moment here on The Weekend Show. A secret weapon is a great asset to have in your back pocket. It helps you get ahead in life. That's how Mack Weldon thinks about clothing, as a secret weapon, timeless, classic style that's infused with performance fabrics and hidden details. Whether you're looking for light-as-air underwear, anti-odor tees, or sweaters with lightweight warmth, Mack Weldon has a range of clothes that feel comfortable all day long and never go out of style. Since I received my zip-up hoodie, I have not taken it off. Seriously, it's one of those items of clothing that just stays on my back pretty much every day. Some guys just want to look good without calling attention to themselves. Mack Weldon apparel gives you understated good looks for understated confidence. They're not flashy, just classic, always in style, and made from the world's most comfortable performance fabrics. Get timeless looks with modern comfort from Mack Weldon. Go to mackweldon.com and get 25% off your first order of $125 or more with promo code WEEKEND. That's mackweldon.com. Promo code WEEKEND. So, it's a new year, 2025, and you're thinking, how am I going to make this year different? Am I going to build something for myself? I'm dying to be my own boss, or see if I can turn this business idea I've been kicking around into a reality. But I just don't know how to make it happen. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen, and let me tell you how. The best time to start your new business is right now, and Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates, no coding or design skills required. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all of your channels and create shoppable posts to help you sell everywhere that people scroll. Shopify makes it easy to manage your growing business. They help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on the important stuff like growing your business. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/weekend to start selling with Shopify today. That's shopify.com/weekend. We're back with Dr. Jennifer Mercieca on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. Donald Trump was complaining the other day that votes from the election are still being counted. He said that the day after they certified the vote in the House. And all 50 states had certified their election results, sent them to Congress. The count was done, the usual legitimate stuff. Isn't that an example to people who maybe are on the fence that what he says is untruthful? Simple things that can be proven. And would it be better to set up a ministry of truth? Maybe the Democrats could do this, whereby they can debunk everything in real time.
So one of the fascinating things about our moment is that, and this is the vulnerability, right, that Donald Trump has been able to exploit, is that we are hardwired for confirmation bias. We are hardwired for motivated reasoning. And the internet, or Donald Trump, can provide us with any fact or seeming fact, right, to confirm what we want to believe. And so if Donald Trump says that they're still counting the votes, people will believe him because they want to believe him. They trust him. They will not believe the fact check, right? Because they don't trust that information. And when they go out onto the internet to confirm that Donald Trump is indeed right, they will find some piece of information that absolutely confirms exactly what Donald Trump said. Right. And so it's, again, the sort of asymmetrical situation where Donald Trump has exploited this vulnerability that we have individually, that his supporters all have, and that is a vulnerability of the information environment. And no matter how many times the other side tries to assert reality, they will always abut those vulnerabilities.
That's why you don't want to put someone with his personality defects into a place of high office, because, he does, I call it the squint test. He sees everything through a squint that works for him, right? So he can make blue look green if he squints and convince people that it's green. He'll be like, look, just squint and you'll see it's green. And maybe it's putting pressure on the lens of the eye that does it. I don't know. I'm sure there's some science to it. But that's, to me, how he lives. And this is the malignance of his narcissism, where he can convince himself. And if he's convinced, then it's much easier to convince us too.
It's absolutely true. He'll just keep repeating it. This is where I was saying before how he's unrelenting. He won't back down. You can tell him, no, it's blue, it's blue, it's blue, it's blue, until you're blue in the face. And he will continue to insist it's green. And one of the things that was so interesting to me in the testimony of David Pecker, the guy who owned the Inquirer, right? Who was involved with the 2016 election hush money.
And he was a friend of Donald Trump. I mean, these people were...
Friend of Donald, yes.
Yeah, they were very close.
Yes. Friend of Donald Trump, so has no reason to turn on him, sort of testifying against probably what he wanted. And what he explained in his testimony was that Donald Trump knew what the true stories were. He would plant them. He would plant these fake stories in Pecker's news organizations. And then he would point to those stories as if they were true. And so, for example, with Ted Cruz, and whether Ted Cruz's dad really had something to do with the assassination attempt or the assassination of JFK, I wrote about this in my book, and Donald Trump, went to the mattresses, essentially, in the media saying, absolutely, this is true. It was in the Inquirer. They wouldn't have put it in there if it was not true. This is a credible organization. They could get into a lot of trouble, right? Just had 18 different reasons for why we must absolutely believe this story that he had, in fact, known was fake, right?
Because it's in print. And by it being in print, that doubles down on his propaganda. Yes.
And as I listened to Pecker talking about the whole catch and kill process, the close relationship they had, all of that, and thought about all of the times that I saw Donald Trump look some reporter straight in the eye and deny absolutely what he knew to be true, I thought, you cannot believe a single word that this guy says, because he can lie that convincingly. And he will continue to lie no matter how many questions you ask him, no matter what perspective you bring to those questions. There's nothing that's going to turn him into a truth teller. Like, he's never going to change his strategy. And it was like, again, I know this, right? But it was just, again, this affirmation of like, if Donald Trump says it's raining, go outside because you can't trust that it's raining.
He said it wasn't raining on his inauguration. Remember? If
he shows up and he's wet from head to toe and says it's raining, you still have to go outside, right? Because he's authoritarian P.T. Barnum, and he maybe got himself wet to convince you that it was raining, right? And so this is the guy that they have elected president, and it's shocking.
He announced in a press conference on the 7th of January that he was going to rename. He was tipping us off. He said, we haven't announced it yet, but he said it anyway. We're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Doesn't it have a nice ring to it? He said, the Gulf of America. This obviously is It's the stuff of madness. But he'll do it. He's not joking.
He will do it. He will do it. He remember he renamed NAFTA. So the NAFTA treaty was the North American Free Trade Alliance, right? Yeah. And he said he was going to put America first. So he renamed it the U.S. whatever, so that America was first in the name, right? Yeah. He's keen on branding and using the brand to tell the story. And so, yeah, I mean, so is this outrage bait? Is he just trying to control the narrative and to get us talking? Maybe. Is he trolling us? Maybe. But maybe not, right? And so then people start to say, well, what does he have the power to do that? And then they start to look into the history of why is it called the Gulf of Mexico and who is responsible for the naming practices of the Gulf? And what if Donald Trump just starts to arbitrarily do it? And then now all of a sudden you have, given credence to this crazy idea and made it something that people are going to debate.
But it's very clever though, isn't it? Because it doesn't require any effort on his part. He's not actually doing anything. And that's the great skill of the propagandist, especially an old, overweight, lazy one who really only wants to be playing golf. It's much easier to make an announcement that is so insane that it sends the world spinning and people running around with their heads cut off like chickens.
He's having fun.
And then he can go back to the golf game.
And his supporters are like, yeah, damn right. Why isn't it called the Gulf of America? Right. Why would we let it be called the Gulf of Mexico? It's not Mexico's Gulf. It's our Gulf, right? Outrage bait.
Let me list a few of the other things that he announced. He's also appeared to confirm a Financial Times article that he wants NATO member nations to commit to spending up to 5% of their economic output. So that's I think it's 3% currently. So raising it to 5% again just gives him leverage to pull the US out of NATO, which I've predicted that is Vladimir Putin's intention for America using his operator Donald Trump. He also repeated the claim that Russia would never have invaded Ukraine if he was president, except Russia was already fighting in Ukraine throughout the Trump presidency and before. He refused to rule out using military force to reclaim the Panama Canal, and he said he had a desire to expand the country's footprint by acquiring Greenland and acquiring Canada, merging it with the United States and rebranding the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, as we just said. I mean, this is the level of insanity that suggests to me that we need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about the personality disorder. We need to talk about him as being somebody who is deeply flawed and unwell. And yet the media doesn't really want to do that.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of that conversation, or certainly haven't seen enough of it. It's interesting, we're here on the verge of the inauguration. I had the opportunity to reread his inaugural address. I was thinking about, sort of what does Donald Trump think the role of the president is, and how did he describe that role in his inaugural in 2017? And it was very interesting to me. He'd never used the word democracy. And he said that the job of the president was to defend the nation's border. And that was its own, essentially that was the only job of the president for Trump. And so all of this expansionism where he's talking about building empire and, expanding the boundaries of the nation, is interesting to me in that I think that it's inconsistent with his expressed view of what the president ought to do, right, which is to defend the nation's boundary. And at the same time, I don't think he really wants folks from Panama to be a part of the United States. I don't think, he really wants, maybe he wants Canadians to think of, to be Americans, but I don't think that he really wants those things. And so it's confusing, right? It's certainly And this is why I think we all think it's insane, right? But it's certainly expansionist and imperialist, and we haven't had a president do that in some time, 100 and I don't know, 30 years or so. I don't know if that's right, but that feels right. And and so yeah, so but at the same time, who's going to stop him?
Isn't it that he just wants his face carved into Mount Rushmore?
He absolutely
Isn't that
wants
what
his
all
face
of this is
carved
about?
Yes.
Because he did say that previously. And
he did.
That really, I guess, is the dream.
Yes. He wants to do something big, something that will replace Abraham Lincoln. He wants to be the guy sitting. He's always talking. He's obsessed with Lincoln. He wants to be the guy sitting on the mall in the chair. He wants to be remembered as a great president. This is actually something that I have done a lot of research on. I have written a book on presidential greatness and Barack Obama and the way that we think about that. Donald Trump is currently ranked last in all of the presidential greatness polls. Presidents like that we have really thought of as bad presidents are ranked above him. Buchanan, for example, who let the Civil War happen. Right. And so the presidents that are ranked in the top three are always George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and FDR. Donald Trump wants to usurp those three and be remembered as the greatest president in American history. He is currently the worst president in American history. So
that he demands respect rather than earns respect. And I think that's the difference, right? And that again goes back to the authoritarianism. It's if you demand to be worshipped rather than rather than earning it. Because if he wanted to make America truly great, he could just offer health care for everybody, free at the point of delivery.
He could do some nice things to help the people, especially the people who elected him, who he's not going to do anything to help. But yeah, so historians and political scientists, when they think about assessing presidential greatness, they think about essentially the context within which the person was president. And so if things are going great and you inherit, like Donald Trump is right now, a good economy, nation's fairly stable in the world, et cetera, you don't even have the chance to be a great president because you can't prove greatness. But if you inherit a crisis, a calamity has befall the nation, right? So Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, first president, FDR with the Great Depression, then you have the opportunity to prove that you are great, right? By leading effectively, by saving the nation from whatever the crisis is. In this case, Donald Trump is the crisis, right? He cannot ever be the greatest president because he is the crisis itself. He's the worst president. So
that's why he doesn't understand why the Justice Department is after him. And he consistently says, this has never happened before to any previous president, that they're coming after me for this and for that. And I'm always sitting at home thinking, well, no other president would have dared to have broken the law as many times as you have. And it's that separation, not recognizing that he is the cause of all of the trouble and drama that follows him.
Yeah, it is a kind of cause and effect situation.
Right.
And that's the thing about Donald Trump is that he is an agent of chaos. And like Narcissus, he will stare at himself and applaud himself and be so enamored with his own, belief in his own greatness and pursuing the adulation of the world to prove how great he is, that he will eventually be his own undoing. That's because what the mythology teaches us.
Dictatorships always fall, you mean?
Well, they do. Authoritarian regimes are profoundly unstable. There's lots and lots of research about that. And so there is that. But it's also the case that, mythology teaches us that a narcissist will always be their own undoing.
When the oxygen supply runs out, they have nothing to feed on.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting that we're having to analyze this man who is a president as a narcissist. And I think that as we speak of him, there will be thousands of people who are watching who have been in relationships with narcissists and have experienced firsthand the manipulation and the love bombing and the behavior that Trump presents but in a non-political way.
That's right. He's very triggering. I have friends who have had experiences like that, and he triggers them, or has at least. I don't know if they've gotten more used to it now, but yeah, I've definitely had conversations with people where they're like, oh, he reminds me just like, such and such. So I think that there are a lot of people who know exactly what Donald Trump is like.
From a political perspective, he's trying to bring in like one big bill, a big, beautiful bill, I think he called it, that will contain all of his major policy ambitions, including a clampdown on immigration, tax cuts, increased military spending, in an attempt to supercharge his radical agenda as he starts this presidency. And by piling all of his main policy goals into one mega bill, I guess that is also a marketing exercise, isn't it? It's like showing I can do all this stuff in one go. And of course, there's very little pushback because he controls the Senate, Congress, the House, and the White House. I mean, he might even get away with it.
Yeah, well, there was that giant playbook that he said he wasn't going to do, right?
Never read Project 2025. Yeah, never read it. I don't know what it is, but there is some good stuff in there, he said, despite not having read it.
I'm sure, if we match up whatever's in the MAGA bill and Project 2025, that we'll find that there's quite a bit of similarity. Yeah, right. So he's going to bundle it all together and make it difficult for people to sort of strip out certain things and say, take it or leave it kind of thing. And it is a push for him to, sort of beat the 100-day benchmark. Again, looking at presidential greatness, FDR did in 100 days. And then every other president is compared to that. What did you do in 100 days? Yeah. Oh, well, it took you 101,
right,
to do your thing. And so here, this gives him the opportunity to say, I did it on day one, which of course is the branding and the promise. It's also his, attempt to say, like, look how much power I have accomplished all of this. And one day, what took FDR, supposedly a great president, 100 days to accomplish. And for sure, he's going to dismantle all of the programs that FDR put into place. So, he really wants to take us back to the 1890s. Deregulation, no safety net, robber barons running free, and no restraints on power. When I was writing my book, I was looking for examples of him just answering the question directly, when was America great? And I could only find one interview where he actually named the time that he thought that America was the greatest. And it was an interview with the New York Times where they had released the transcript. And it was with Maggie Haberman and David Sanger. And they asked him, when was America great? And he said it was during the Gilded Age. He said it was during the manufacturing boom era where you had this unrestrained capitalism. And he thought that it was a really exciting time in America and that was when America was great. Nobody paid attention to that in 2016 or since. I wrote about it, but nobody paid attention to it. And I always thought that was so interesting because I think a lot of people imagined, depending on their age, the 1950s in America or the 1980s in America. Nobody was imagining that Trump was actually thinking about the 1880s and the 1890s in America. And that's what his model is in his mind for when America was greatest. So
that's
what we have to look forward to.
The white man reigned supreme and you could snatch land grab effectively. And,
that's right.
And you could own people, you could own humans, trade them. I mean, this is the problem with him, is that he is of another time.
Yeah.
he's approaching 80 years of age, and the world was very, very different then.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And so people don't really realize that his goal, of course, is to have power and to be loved and whatnot. But his goal for the country is to return us to a time before essentially the liberal consensus took hold, right? So the liberal consensus of government is that government is necessary, that we need it in people's lives to protect them, that the government has some role in collecting taxes, in providing education, in providing social safety net,
maintaining infrastructure,
et cetera. All of the things, protecting the environment, protecting drinking water, anything that Teddy Roosevelt put in place, anything that Franklin Delano Roosevelt put in place, anything that happened in the 1960s, like all of that infrastructure, all of those norms, all of those laws, those are the things that Donald Trump wants to get rid of. I don't think most people understand
do take that stuff for granted now, and maybe that's why
Absolutely.
he's able to get away with it, because we just presume that if we open the faucet, that the clean water is going to come out. But maybe generationally, people have forgotten that somebody actually had to bring about legislation to make that happen.
That's right. The people of Flint, Michigan don't take that for granted. Of course. And lots of other places in the South. Right. I watched a really interesting documentary with my child who is 11 and likes PBS documentaries. And it was called, I think it was called The Suicide Squad, but maybe it was. It was about these people who essentially were taste testers for all of the food that was being sold in the 1910s, maybe 1915, 1920, before there were laws protecting food purity. And it was based on a book, and it was really interesting. The thing that really stands out to me is that because the milk industry was not regulated, and milk is a perishable product, that the milk companies would put arsenic in the milk in order to make it look white when it was going bad, and in order to cover up the stink, right? And so all of these mothers were serving their little babies arsenic tainted milk because there were no rules against that. Right. That's the kind of thing that the robber barons do, right? When there are not rules and regulations, they put arsenic in the milk because that's the expedient way to save the product and sell more things.
It's cheaper. It's cheaper for them.
It's cheaper.
Yeah.
And so that's Trump's America that we have to look forward to, unfortunately.
It's the most interesting time. I never thought that I would see this in my lifetime. I'm sure you didn't either. The fact that all of the safety and the security and the respect that comes with being in the United States has now changed. And Trump's always saying this, that blaming Biden, saying we've lost respect on the world stage and I'm here to bring it back. And he forgets that it was 2016 when America lost its respect on the world stage, when he showed up the first time.
That's right. There's lots of polling about, sort of American soft power and opinions about the United States and American stability and America's role in the world and all of that stuff. And it took a real huge nosedive when Donald Trump was elected. And then it picked back up, and Joe Biden was able to rebuild our foreign alliances and to reassure people on the world stage that America was a nation of laws and that we could be trusted to uphold our bargains, but that's not the case anymore. And Donald Trump will say that's weakness, right? That his strategy is to be unpredictable and chaotic, and by doing that, you win somehow. But that's not, how the rule of law or diplomacy works. So it is an interesting time, Anthony.
Yes, I do feel like people have been in a bit of a depression since November 5th. And there is a sense that, people don't really want to look at what's happening. And so really the recommendation or the solution is just to, be around the people you love and find the joy in your little unit rather than relying on the de facto leader of the country to offer you, any kindness.
Absolutely, you should be around the people you love, who bring you joy, right? At the same time, it is what it is a thing that I say a lot. And so, I might not want it to be this, but this is what it is. And I think it's really important for our own sanity to not allow ourselves to be trolled. I think that so much of Trump's agenda and his communication style and all of the right really is about trolling us, trying to get us to respond. And so, they're going to break the government and they're going to break the world order. And that's going to happen probably. Right. And I don't see how we can control it, but maybe we can. Maybe we can make improvements. We can fight, the things through the courts or, through protesting or whatever, hopefully. But in the end, it's going to break probably. And so what we should do is be planned to swoop in with a plan for when it breaks, right? Because there will be a power vacuum. And at that point, we can remake this country to be more democratic. It's always had the promise of democracy and not always the best practices, and so I think that the Democrats or the liberals or just sane and rational people probably wouldn't have wanted this or broken the government themselves, broken the world order themselves, but it's being done. And so it is what it is, right? So be prepared to swoop in and make it better when you have the chance. Exactly. Yeah. Have a plan, right? So what we learned from all of the revolutions that happened in the 2010s was that, people would go out into the street and they would put pressure on authoritarian regimes, different places around the world. And they would, in some cases, topple those governments. But they didn't have a plan. They didn't have anything ready to go for what happened when the regime collapsed. And so in a lot of those cases, where people were protesting for more democratic regimes, they ended up with more authoritarian regimes, right? Because they weren't ready. They didn't have an apparatus. And so there's a lot of smart people on the left and sane right and whatnot, who think very carefully about institutions and power and, law. And I'm sure that they will swoop in and when the time is right.
Well, they certainly won't go down without a fight. And I think that there are plenty of lawmakers and people up and coming as well, activists who are showing enormous promise, who are vehemently pro-democracy. And, I think maybe getting away from left and right and just being about democracy and goodness rather than wanting to burn everything down. Is
that's
the way
how I think of myself. I'm pro-democracy first and foremost, and everything else is what happens, right? What the people want to happen.
Okay, we have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for joining the Weekend Show, Dr. Jennifer Mercieca.
My pleasure.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.